From a woman who went to buy chocolates and hours later was found dead inside a dark railway tunnel, to a man pinned to the earth with a pitchfork in a rumoured occult sacrifice. Today, we are unlocking 4 of Britain's most chilling unsolved cases. My name is James, and this is Midnight's Metro Mysteries, where we take a step into the unknown on the last train home. Case number 1. Who puts Bella in the Wych Elm? Sunday, the 18th of April, 1943. Deep in the heart of Hagley Wood in Worcestershire, 4 local boys are poaching and hunting for birds' nests in the heavy foliage. Around midday, one of the boys scales a massive gnarled wych elm tree, reaching into the hollow trunk to check for eggs. His hand brushes against something hard. He peers down into the darkness and notices something staring back at him. Wedged deep inside the tree is a human skull. When police arrived and carefully opened the trunk, they discovered a near-complete female skeleton. She was still wearing the remnants of a light-coloured dress, stockings and a single shoe. A gold wedding ring sat loosely on one finger. A piece of taffeta cloth had been violently stuffed deep into her mouth and throat, and her right hand had been severed entirely. Forensic pathologist Professor James Webster examined the remains. He concluded the woman was in her 30s and had been dead for roughly 18 months. The hollow trunk of the wych elm was incredibly tight. Webster noted it would have been physically impossible to force a stiffened corpse into that gap. Her killer had to have folded her into the hollow trunk whilst her body was still warm, just before or just after she had died. That 18-month timeline places her murder perfectly in late 1941. That was the exact same time 2 separate locals had frantically called the police, reporting the terrifying sounds of a woman screaming uncontrollably from deep inside Hagley Wood. In the pitch-black wartime conditions, police searched the trees and found nothing, then officially dismissed the sounds as mating foxes. 18 months later, her bones were pulled from that exact spot. With what we have already learned, was this poor woman alive inside the tree trunk and possibly heard the police officers looking for her, but unable to scream out due to the cloth shoved down her throat, was left there to die? Despite nationwide searches and dental record checks, the woman remained completely unidentified. She had no name until Christmas 1943. This is when mysterious chalk graffiti began appearing on brick walls and monuments across the West Midlands overnight. The messages were all written in the same handwriting and asked a simple, haunting question. Who put Bella down the wych elm? For decades, the most popular theory was wartime espionage. Declassified MI5 files revealed a German spy ring operating in the Midlands. The theory suggested that Bella was actually a German-born actress named Clara Bauer, of which I'm probably hideously pronouncing her second name. Let's call her Clara. Clara was parachuted into England as an undercover agent and subsequently assassinated by her handlers or British intelligence, or so the theory went. But in 2016, researchers finally tracked down Clara's official death certificate, proving definitively Clara was not Bella. With spies ruled out, the occult took over. Prominent folklorist Margaret Murray publicly claimed Bella was a blood sacrifice, tying her death to local pagan covens, even linking it to the infamous unsolved Pitchfork witchcraft murder of Charles Walton in a nearby village, an incredibly mysterious murder that we will actually dive into later in this video. The case went cold until 1953, a woman named Una Mossop came forward, claiming her late husband had confessed to the crime. He allegedly told her he and a Dutch associate had been drinking with a woman who got far too heavily intoxicated. As a cruel punishment, they bundled her into a hollow tree to teach her a lesson, leaving her there to accidentally suffocate. The police investigated, but with the husband already dead by suicide, nothing could ever be proven. As unsettling as this case has already been, it got weirder still. Following an inquest at the time, Bella's skull and skeleton was sent to the University of Birmingham for further examination. In 2009, West Mercia Police wanted to conduct a full review of the cold case to see if any modern DNA profiling could finally identify her. When they went to retrieve her bones, they had completely vanished. No record exists as to what happened to them, and so the identity of the woman in the wych elm tree will remain permanently locked in the shadows of the 1940s forest she was found in. If you're enjoying this video and the concept of the last train home, please do this new channel a massive favour and like the video, and don't forget to subscribe for more. Thank you so much. Case number 2, the Brighton Trunk Murders. Summer 1934. A sweltering heatwave has gripped the bustling seaside town of Brighton. The railway station is packed with holidaymakers, families and ordinary people going about their lives. Sitting quietly in the luggage office is an unclaimed plywood trunk, and it is hiding a terrible secret. On the 17th of June, cloakroom attendant William Joseph Vinicombe noticed a horrific smell radiating from the cheap luggage. It had been sat there in the stifling heat for 11 days. He alerted the authorities, and when Chief Inspector Robert Donaldson forced the locks and pulled back the layers of the brown paper and newspaper, he found the expertly dismembered torso of a woman. Elsewhere, and a day later, railway staff at King's Cross Station in London opened another similar, suspicious-looking trunk. Inside were the same victim's legs. Home Office pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury examined the remains. He made two discoveries. First, and most horrifically, the woman was 5 months pregnant. And second, her feet were remarkably well cared for, with perfectly manicured toenails. The press quickly dubbed her the girl with the pretty feet, speculating she was a professional dancer or a woman of high social standing. Because the killer had meticulously removed her hands, she could not be fingerprinted. Because her head was never found, she could not be identified. Sir Bernard Spilsbury examined the clean bloodless cuts and confirmed the woman had been expertly dismembered after she was already dead. Due to there being a lack of fatal wounds on the torso, Spilsbury could not determine what actually killed her. The discovery sparked sheer national panic. Tensions were so high that Scotland Yard was called in and launched a massive house-to-house search across the entire town of Brighton. A month later, on July 15th, police, still searching for clues, forced their way into a locked room at a cheap lodging house at 52 Kemp Street. The room showed signs of a violent struggle and a hasty clean-up, and sitting in the corner was another trunk. Inside was the decomposing body of 42-year-old Violet Kay. The press and the public immediately assumed they had caught a serial killer. The media dubbed it the work of the Trunk Murderer. Headlines screamed that a monster was stalking the streets of Brighton. But they were wrong. The two cases were completely unrelated. A pure horrific coincidence. Violet had been killed by a single brutal hammer blow to the head. Her much younger lover, Tony Mancini, a man with a criminal record, admitted to putting her body in the trunk but claimed he found her dead and panicked. Despite the staggering circumstantial evidence, Mancini was defended by a top barrister and sensationally acquitted of the murder. 40 years later, knowing he could not be tried twice under double jeopardy laws, Mancini gave a newspaper interview. He openly bragged about smashing Violet's skull with a hammer in a drunken rage. Whilst Mancini eventually confessed to the second murder, the killer of the first woman, the pregnant girl with the pretty feet, was never found. Modern theories have pointed to local men like George Shotton, who was posthumously discovered to have murdered and dismembered his own wife, but no charges were ever brought in the Brighton case. To this day, the first victim remains unidentified, resting in an unmarked grave. No one knows who she was, how she died, or who calmly packed her away into two trunks and left them in different train stations. Case number 3. The Pitchfork Witchcraft Murder. February 1945. The tiny, isolated village of Lower Quinton in Warwickshire feels cut off from the outside world, and 74-year-old retired farm labourer Charles Walton fits perfectly into the eerie landscape. Walton was known to be a very eccentric man and a lifelong bachelor who lived with his niece Edith. He also walked with a heavy stick due to rheumatism and still took on light hedging work in order to survive. To the other residents of Lower Quinton, Walton was something to be feared. Villagers whispered that the old man possessed the evil eye. He claimed he could speak to wild birds, and he deliberately bred natterjack toads, creatures that are heavily associated with dark magic, witchcraft and English folklore. Some of the local farmers secretly and genuinely believed that Walton was using those toads to blight the crops and curse their dying cattle. On February 14th, which is obviously Valentine's Day, Walton was hired by a local farmer named Alfred Potter to trim down hedges on the slopes of Meon Hill. Night eventually fell and Walton had failed to return home, prompting his niece Edith to panic. She fetched her neighbour and the two of them grabbed flashlights and headed up to the dark hill to find him. Underneath a thick hedgerow, the beams of their flashlights illuminated a scene of absolute medieval butchery. Walton had been savagely beaten over the head with his own walking stick. His own two-pronged pitchfork had been driven entirely through his neck, pinning his body flush to the earth. Finally, his neck had been disgustingly ripped open with his own trouncing hook, which is a heavy curved agricultural blade, and it was left buried deep in his throat. Almost immediately, terrifying rumours swept through the entire village. In ancient Anglo-Saxon pagan traditions, pinning a suspected witch to the earth and letting their blood seep into the ground was the only way to break a curse that had been cast upon the land. The local police were so overwhelmed by the sheer brutality of the macabre scene that they immediately called in Scotland Yard. They dispatched Detective Inspector Robert Fabian, one of the most famous and celebrated detectives in the country. When Fabian arrived in Lower Quinton, he hit an impenetrable wall of silence. The villagers flat out refused to speak to him. Doors were slammed in his face. No one had seen anything, and no one knew anything. Fabian noted in his official reports that the entire community was absolutely paralysed by fear and superstition. Despite all the talk of pagan rituals, Detective Inspector Fabian had a very grounded prime suspect, Alfred Potter, the farmer who had hired Walton. Potter was the last person to see the old man alive. His alibi was full of holes and his stories constantly changed. Fabian also found bloodstains on Potter's trousers, which the farmer hastily claimed were from a slaughtered pig. Fabian firmly believed Potter had killed Walton either due to a dispute regarding wages or because Potter genuinely believed the old man was cursing his livestock. Despite Walton's neck being violently ripped open, police noted there was remarkably little blood on the ground around the body. This sparked immediate rumours that the killer had deliberately collected the blood for a ritualistic sacrifice. Prominent folklorist Margaret Murray publicly pointed out that Valentine's Day was the eve of an ancient pagan blood festival. Local historians quickly realised that this had happened before. In 1875, in the nearby village of Long Compton, a woman named Anne Tennant was murdered with a pitchfork by a local man who believed she was the leader of a coven of witches. In that case, the killer was consequently imprisoned for life inside Broadmoor Lunatic Asylum. No one was ever charged with the pitchfork murder of Charles Walton. The case remains officially unsolved. Detective Inspector Fabian would later write that out of all of the horrific crimes he investigated in his legendary career, the shadows of Meon Hill were the only ones that genuinely still haunted him. Fabian would also go on to write this: "I advise anybody who is tempted at any time and on any pretext to venture into black magic, witchcraft, Satanism, call it what you will, to remember Charles Walton and to think of his death, which was so clearly the ghastly climax of a pagan ritual. Whatever actually happened on that hill in 1945 has been locked away in the soil, never to be unearthed." Case number 4. The Merstham Tunnel Mystery. In the autumn of 1905, the gaslit streets of Edwardian London became the backdrop to one of the most chilling unsolved murders in British history. Mary Sophia Money was a 22-year-old woman who worked for Bridges Dairy in Clapham. She was widely described as a cheerful, sensible and completely ordinary young woman. She shared a room with a fellow dairy employee, had no known enemies, no financial distress, and lived a quiet, respectable working-class life. On Sunday, the 24th of September, that quiet life came to a violent and terrifying end. At 7 p.m, Mary finished her shift at the dairy. She told her roommate she was going for a brief walk and would not be long. Crucially, Mary left her purse, her watch, and her heavy winter coat behind in the room. She took only a few pennies of loose change. A local sweet shop owner remembered selling Mary some chocolates shortly after she left the dairy. She was apparently alone, in good spirits, and walked off towards Clapham Junction station. She would never be seen alive by her friends or family again. Just before 11 p.m. that night, a railway sub-inspector named William Peacock was walking the tracks, inspecting the line inside the Merstham Tunnel. In the gloom, his lantern illuminated a horrific sight. Lying between the tracks was the terribly mutilated body of a young woman. Because of the catastrophic injuries, railway police initially assumed it was a tragic suicide. They gathered her remains and transported them to a local pub to act as a makeshift mortuary. However, when Scotland Yard detectives and medical experts examined the body the next day, the theory of suicide instantly collapsed. A chilling piece of evidence was found in Mary's throat, her own white silk scarf. Even more disturbing, pathologists found thick coal soot inside her mouth and throat, lodged directly behind the gag. Mary had been alive, breathing heavily and violently struggling inside a soot-filled environment before the scarf was jammed into her throat to silence her. The autopsy concluded she had been beaten, gagged, and then physically hurled out of the door of a moving train while at speed. Medical experts came to the conclusion that she had died from a brutal impact with the tunnel wall. Detectives determined she was thrown from the 9:13 p.m. train from London Bridge to Brighton. But this presented an impossible puzzle. Mary only had a few pennies on her, nowhere near enough to buy a ticket for that train, let alone a first-class ticket. Yet, eyewitnesses placed her inside a first-class carriage. This had to mean someone else bought her a ticket and invited her on board. Scotland Yard believed Mary had a secret, maybe a wealthier lover, whom she had gone to meet that night. Witnesses began to come forward. A ticket collector at London Bridge Station remembered a young woman matching Mary's description, walking closely with a highly agitated man wearing a suit and a bowler hat. Another terrifying account came from a railway signalman at Purley Oaks, a station just before the tunnel. As the 9:13 p.m. train sped past his brightly lit signal box, he looked into the windows and saw a man and a woman locked in a vicious, violent physical struggle inside a first-class compartment. Despite massive public appeals and hundreds of interviews, this agitated man in the bowler hat was never identified. But years later, a deeply disturbing shadow was cast over this case from a completely unexpected direction. When Mary was murdered, her body was formally identified by her brother, Robert Money. He cooperated with the police and had a solid alibi for the night of the murder. But Robert was hiding a monstrous darkness all of his own. 7 years later, in 1912, Robert Money lured his bigamous wife and 3 of his own children to a house in Eastbourne, where he murdered them all. When the British public realised that the brother of the Merstham Tunnel victim had grown up to become a prolific family annihilator, explosive rumours circulated that he had actually been the man in the bowler hat and had murdered his own sister back in 1905. However, Scotland Yard never found a single piece of physical evidence linking Robert to that train carriage. The identity of the man who bought Mary's ticket and threw her into the pitch-black tunnel remains completely unknown. Whoever he was, he stepped off a train in 1905 and vanished into history. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey. To keep exploring the unknown, click the video on your screen right now for another terrifying case. What do you think happened in these unsolved mysteries? Please let me know your theories in the comments below. And also, please don't forget to hit subscribe to grab your ticket for the next ride. This is Midnight Metro Mysteries. I hope to see you on our next journey home.